There is someone in your life who has been holding something back, something buried so deep and kept so quiet that even admitting how long it's been there would make them uncomfortable. This has been going on much longer than you probably realized, much longer than anything they've shown on the surface would suggest. They didn't wake up one morning and find that their feelings had simply evaporated. They didn't move on the way their behavior might have led you to believe. What actually happened was far quieter than that, far more gradual and almost entirely invisible from the outside. They pressed their real feelings down because they genuinely didn't know what else to do with them. They tucked everything away and kept it out of sight, convincing themselves that silence was the easier road, that staying still would cost less than moving forward. But emotions that get buried don't dissolve. They don't quietly fade away into nothing. They settle in and get heavier. They accumulate weight with every passing week, every passing month, every day that goes by without being acknowledged. They wait, patiently, stubbornly, until eventually all of that accumulated weight forces itself to the surface. And that is exactly where this comes from. Not from a place of confidence or resolution, not from a place of peace. It comes from fear, from the uncomfortable realization that too much time may have already slipped by without anything being done about it. Something shifted inside them recently, and it shifted in a way they couldn't explain away or push back down. Maybe something small crossed their path and reminded them of you. Maybe they heard your name somewhere unexpected. Maybe life simply got quiet enough that the noise they'd been using to drown out the truth stopped working. Whatever the trigger was, it hit them with a force they weren't prepared for. One clear, unavoidable thought landed on them with its full weight. They might lose you in a way that can't be undone. That realization didn't arrive gently. It didn't slip in quietly during a busy afternoon where it could be set aside and forgotten. It arrived in the late hours when the world went still. It came in the silence of a phone that felt empty. It surfaced when other people's company started feeling hollow in comparison to something they couldn't quite name. When the noise of everyday life finally faded, the quiet that replaced it started asking questions they had no more excuses to avoid, and they ran out of ways to look past the truth. That was the moment it caught them, fully and without mercy. Nobody else holds what you hold. Nobody else listens the way you always listened. Nobody else ever understood them without requiring a lengthy explanation first. Nobody else offered that particular kind of support, the kind that was present without being suffocating, caring without being controlling. The moment that truth became undeniable, something urgent started building inside them. But here's what's important to understand about that urgency. It isn't purely love. It is also fear, specifically the fear of permanently losing something that cannot simply be found again somewhere else. They know that. Once a connection like this is truly gone, it doesn't get replaced. If they could speak to you right now without pride filtering every word, without fear turning honesty into silence, what they would say is something relatively simple. They should have done more. They should have acted before the clock ran as far as it did. They assumed they had more time than they actually had. They took for granted that your patience, your understanding, and your willingness to stay would remain available indefinitely, regardless of how long their silence stretched on. What they failed to grasp was that silence has its own consequences. That saying nothing is still a decision. That doing nothing still produces an outcome. And that outcome came at a cost. Specifically, it cost the closeness that once existed between you. They carry guilt for being absent when their presence would have meant something, for staying quiet when honesty was what the moment needed, for choosing avoidance when something far more important was actually at stake. At the time, distance felt more manageable. Silence felt safer. Avoiding the difficult emotions felt like a form of control, but avoiding a painful truth never actually protects anyone from it. It only postpones it. And while it waits, it grows. This person doesn't struggle because they feel too little. They struggle because they feel far more than they've ever known how to handle. Being genuinely open with you would have required them to sit inside uncertainty. It would have meant risking rejection. It would have asked them to look honestly at parts of themselves they weren't ready to examine. There's something worth understanding here. When the things living in our emotional shadows are never brought into the light, they continue running things quietly from behind the scenes. And people tend to call that fate, or bad timing, or circumstances that just didn't line up. That's not far from what happened here. Fear made the decisions. Pride spoke louder than vulnerability. And eventually, silence became the only language being used. Now those choices have grown into something they can no longer step around. There's another layer to all of this, and it sits heavily on them. They can sense that you've changed. Something in your energy feels different to them now. The way you respond carries a tone they don't quite recognize. Even your silence has a different quality to it than it used to. You may still carry feelings connected to what once existed between you, but you're no longer chasing answers. You're no longer repeating the same things, hoping something will finally land differently. You're no longer standing in that exhausting place where confusion and uncertainty filled every available space. That transformation unsettles them more than they expected. The reason it hits them so hard is because they depended on your patience far more than they were ever willing to admit. They leaned on your understanding. They leaned on your consistency. They leaned on your willingness to stay, all while keeping their own heart safely behind walls they rarely lowered. Deep down, they assumed you would simply always be there, waiting, forgiving, making space for them no matter how long they took. They never genuinely imagined that you would reach a point where you chose yourself. But you did, and they feel that choice clearly. Your calmness now carries a weight that no argument ever could, because arguments still contain attachment. Arguments still reveal that someone is fighting to be heard. But your calm feels different. It feels like acceptance. And that possibility forces them to face something they'd been successfully avoiding. The real chance that your life is moving forward without them in it. For a long time, they told themselves there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another moment to finally say what they'd left unsaid, another chance to show up differently. Now they are no longer sure those chances still exist. That uncertainty follows them. It surfaces during quiet evenings. It appears when something ordinary catches their attention and pulls up a memory of you. It comes when emotions they believed were gone return with unexpected clarity. And the memories that surface aren't dramatic or cinematic. In many cases, they're surprisingly ordinary. A simple conversation, a shared moment of laughter, a familiar phrase, a moment of being genuinely understood by another person. Those small memories carry weight because they point to something rare. The experience of being truly seen, of being known by someone without having to perform or explain, of a connection that never fully released its hold, no matter how hard they tried to convince themselves it had. Now they find themselves suspended between two things at once: regret for what wasn't done and fear of what may no longer be possible. Neither of those feelings gives them any peace. Part of them wants to reach out immediately and say everything. Part of them is still afraid of how you'd respond, afraid that too much time has already passed, afraid that who you've grown into has moved beyond the place where they left things unfinished. But even with all that fear pressing down, the truth keeps pushing back. It keeps asking to be recognized. It keeps refusing to stay buried. Because some connections leave a mark that distance and silence simply cannot erase. Some people remain present in a person's heart, even when they've been absent from their daily life for a long time. And whether they're ready to say it openly or not, that's the reality they are now having to face. For the first time in a while, they're not focused entirely on protecting themselves from uncomfortable feelings. Instead, they're being forced to look honestly at what staying silent has actually taken from them. They're being pushed to examine what fear has genuinely cost. Not as an abstract idea, but in the specific and concrete terms of what is no longer there. And perhaps most significantly, they're being asked to recognize the value of what once existed before they assumed it would always be waiting for them. That recognition arrived with real weight. And once certain truths become impossible to ignore, there's rarely a clean path back to the comfort of pretending they were never seen. What they are afraid of losing goes beyond just your presence in their life. They are afraid of losing the specific experience of being truly known without being judged for what that knowing reveals. They are afraid of losing the emotional safety they relied on without ever fully acknowledging how heavily they relied on it. They are afraid of losing that uncommon space where they felt understood without being pushed past their own limits before they were ready. Only now are they beginning to see that not every bond can be rebuilt after it's been left to fall apart. Not every meaningful connection can be recreated with someone new. Some people leave an impact that simply cannot be duplicated, no matter how much time passes or who else comes along. That understanding follows them now, wherever they go. It rises in the quiet moments when there's nothing left to distract them. It surfaces whenever they try to move forward and find the ground beneath them feels unstable. It returns every time they find themselves comparing someone new to you and immediately recognizing a difference they can't explain away. That is why the urgency inside them keeps growing. It isn't about control or reclaiming some kind of power over the situation. It comes from the plain and simple recognition that time is no longer something they have in unlimited supply. They can feel a door beginning to close slowly, not with anger, not with any dramatic final declaration, just quietly in the background, almost without announcement. And that kind of quiet closing is often the most serious kind of all. When something closes gently inside a person's heart, it rarely opens again the same way. They want to reach out. They want to find words that actually carry the weight of what they feel. They want to explain themselves with honesty instead of defensiveness. They want to offer an apology that means something real rather than something rehearsed and hollow. But fear interrupts every attempt before it can go anywhere. Fear keeps asking whether it's already too late. Fear keeps whispering that perhaps you no longer feel what you once felt. Fear keeps reminding them that showing their real self could lead somewhere painful. So they hesitate, they hold back, they write things in their mind and erase them before they ever exist anywhere outside of it. They walk through entire imagined conversations from beginning to end that never actually take place. They examine every possible outcome and still find themselves exactly where they started, stuck, unmoving, and quietly unraveling. This is not a promise that everything resolves. It is not a fairy tale with a tidy ending. It is not a guarantee of anything. It is more like an honest confession spoken across the distance between what was and what is now. They are not claiming to have fixed everything. They are not pretending they suddenly have all the clarity they lacked before. What they are finally admitting, even if only in the privacy of their own thoughts, is that treating you as though you would always be there waiting was not fair to you. They didn't recognize your real value until they were standing inside the emptiness that followed your absence. And when truth shows up this late, it carries extra weight, because it arrives alongside the awareness that something genuinely important may have already moved past the point of being recovered. But what this means for you matters far more than what it means for them. So pay attention to this part. This is not an invitation to stand still and wait. It is not asking you to forgive before you're actually ready. It is not asking you to return to the same pain and confusion you already lived through once. It is simply telling you the truth that their actions never communicated clearly enough. You mattered to them much more than they ever found a way to show. Your absence is louder in their life now than your presence ever seemed when you were there every day. What existed between you was real, even if they handled it poorly. And the power in this moment belongs entirely to whatever you choose to do with that information. Because real power doesn't move simply because someone else has become desperate. Deep regret does not automatically equal genuine readiness to change. A person can be overwhelmed by what they've lost and still not be capable of providing the steady, responsible, consistent care that something real actually requires. That distinction matters enormously. Right now, they are sitting with the honest consequences of the choices they made when those choices actually counted. Consequences have a way of stripping everything back. They remove the comfortable stories. They dissolve the excuses. They show plainly what silence cost everyone involved. They've been revisiting old memories, memories they once thought were too small to hold any significance. They see those same moments differently now. through the lens of loss rather than the filter of pride. They remember the small things you did without expecting anything back. They remember how you checked on them for no particular reason. They remember how you could sense something was off with them before they'd said a single word. They remember how you held yourself together even when they unexpectedly pulled away. They remember how you consistently moved toward understanding rather than blame. Those memories weigh on them because they point to something difficult to accept. You met them at a depth they hadn't yet reached within themselves. And at the time, they stepped back from the emotional responsibility that kind of depth requires. For a long time, they told themselves that distance was a way of protecting something. Now that same distance feels much less like safety and far more like exposure. Even through the silence that exists now, they still feel something of you in it. But your silence has changed its character. Where it once felt temporary, it now feels settled. Where it once felt like a pause before the next conversation, it now feels like life genuinely continuing without an expectation of return. That shift affects them more than they would ever say out loud. They can sense that you are no longer building your emotional life around their uncertainty. You are no longer arranging yourself around their mixed signals. You are no longer waiting for them to arrive at the place where you were already standing. That realization opens up a deeper fear. Not just the fear of being turned away if they reach out, but the fear that they may no longer hold the same place in your life that they once did. That you may have quietly, without anger or confrontation or any need for a final explanation, simply turned the page. That kind of calm is frightening to someone who had grown accustomed to your availability, especially when they relied on it without ever truly earning it. Something else is becoming clear to them now. You never asked them to be flawless. You never required them to have every answer. You never demanded they become someone they fundamentally weren't. You simply wanted them to show up when it mattered. You wanted honesty instead of avoidance, effort instead of silence, sincerity instead of emotional distance. The bar was never impossible. You were asking for presence, for truth, for something consistent enough to be real. Only now are they beginning to understand what that actually meant and what it cost not to provide it. That understanding grows heavier with every day they spend looking back at what could have been different. You were never asking them to completely transform at their core. You were simply asking them to live up to the values they claimed to have. Now they can see with uncomfortable clarity how many times they reached for the safe and comfortable option when what the moment genuinely called for was courage. They kept telling themselves they weren't ready yet. They manufactured reasons for the silence. They built justifications for why the timing was never quite right. But readiness doesn't show up on its own when life finally becomes convenient. It is a choice. It is something that has to be made deliberately and then acted on. When you showed up with honesty and genuine presence, they didn't fully meet you there. They held part of themselves in reserve. They stayed guarded when openness was what was needed. And now, that opportunity doesn't feel the same as it once did. They can sense the change in you. It lives in your voice. It shows in the pace of how you respond. It's there in the fact that you no longer work to prove your worth to them. It lives in a quiet confidence that has taken the place of where longing and reaching used to be. That shift changes the entire landscape of the situation. For a long time, they believed they had unlimited time precisely because you kept showing up with patience. They confused that patience with permanent availability. They interpreted your care as a kind of guarantee that you would always be waiting according to their schedule. What they forgot is that patience has a limit, that self-respect eventually rises, that clarity eventually arrives, and that eventually a person stops placing themselves second. Now, they find themselves inside a difficult internal conflict. They want to move toward you, but don't want to start something they're not sure they can sustain. They want to offer a genuine apology, but are afraid of making promises they might not be able to keep. They want to restore what was lost, but understand that restoring it requires real effort, real consistency, and real accountability. So they remain suspended between two forces, between wanting and holding back, between reaching forward and retreating to what is familiar, between the pull toward you and the old habit of staying safely distant. That is why their energy has felt uneven and restless. Their heart points one direction, while their actions still move in another. They imagine finding the courage to actually step forward. They picture themselves saying exactly the right thing. They envision showing up as a clearer and more capable version of themselves. But imagining is easy. Living it is something else entirely. Living it requires something real and repeated and sustained over time. It asks for demonstrated proof rather than well-crafted words. And this is where fear holds on most tightly, because somewhere underneath everything, they understand the truth. Words alone will not be enough anymore. You are not waiting to be moved by something beautifully said. You are watching for what holds. You are paying attention to what lasts. You are looking for actions that continue long after a conversation ends. That doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've grown stronger. You learned how to sit with disappointment without being defined by it. You faced difficult truths honestly instead of running from them. You stopped allowing reality to be softened into something more comfortable. They are only beginning that same process now. And timing matters more than they expected. Growing through loss feels entirely different from growing while love is still safely within reach. They know this, even if they can't bring themselves to say it clearly. They know that even if they speak now, what once existed between you cannot simply return unchanged. That frightens them, because what they miss most isn't just your presence. It's the version of you that trusted freely, the version that offered your heart without needing to protect it first. Trust doesn't return automatically because someone finally says the right things. Once trust changes shape, it changes the shape of everything around it. So they stand at a crossroads. Behind them is the comfort of hiding, avoidance, old habits, familiar excuses. Ahead of them is something that offers no cover at all. Honesty without a safety net, vulnerability, accountability. If they stay where they are, they risk losing you completely. If they move forward, they have to face parts of themselves they've spent years carefully avoiding. That's something they've resisted for a very long time. What you've been sensing is real. It isn't something invented by hope or longing. Something genuine is shifting beneath the surface. Underneath all of it, a quiet truth has been gaining weight and strength. Loss doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes it comes softly. Sometimes it looks like emotional distance. Sometimes it reveals itself through small changes in how someone's energy feels to you. Sometimes it arrives as a slow, creeping awareness that something important is beginning to slip past the point of easy return. They feel that quiet truth now whenever they think about reaching out. They feel it when they imagine you moving forward with peace. They feel it when they picture you building a life defined by clarity rather than confusion. That image unsettles them deeply, not because they wish anything bad for you, but because they're realizing they may no longer occupy the place in your future they once assumed would always be theirs. There is nothing that can stop that realization now. No amount of staying busy, no distraction sustainable enough to hold it back indefinitely. For perhaps the first time, they are genuinely reckoning with what fear has actually cost them. For a long time, they resisted their feelings for you. They resisted the responsibility that comes with being emotionally present. They resisted vulnerability, openness, softness, all the things that real connection actually requires. Now all of that resistance has nowhere left to go. It has become pressure. And the pressure keeps building. Because they are not only afraid of losing you, they are afraid of what losing you says about them. At a deeper level, they understand this was never about bad timing. It was fear. Fear of being fully seen. Fear of not being enough. Fear of caring deeply and failing anyway. Fear of not knowing how to hold something meaningful without damaging it. They keep returning to specific moments. Moments when they could have spoken. Moments when honesty was available to them. Moments when a different choice would have changed the direction of everything. Those moments seemed small when they were happening. Now they feel enormous. Now they carry real weight. Now they keep coming back. You didn't disappear suddenly. You adjusted gradually, quietly, and without announcement, to what they consistently showed was available. You stopped carrying the emotional weight alone. You stopped filling every silence with hope. You stopped sacrificing your own peace to maintain something that wasn't being cared for from both sides. Those changes happened slowly. No dramatic confrontations, no final declarations, just a series of small, private decisions that gradually brought you back to yourself. They see that now. They notice you no longer need them the way you once did. They notice their moods no longer redirect your choices. They notice their uncertainty no longer has the same reach into your emotional world. But what strikes them most is your calm. Calm is often harder to face than anger. Anger still reaches outward. Anger still carries the heat of emotional investment. Calm carries something different. It carries the quiet weight of acceptance. It suggests that reality has been acknowledged. It suggests that someone may have stopped waiting for things to eventually change. They understand confusion. They understand avoidance. They even understand mixed signals. But they have no map for someone who has become genuinely clear and steady within themselves. You are no longer waiting to be chosen by someone who isn't sure. You know your own worth now, and that changes everything about where they stand. Their fear keeps layering on itself. They worry that coming forward now would only prove they still aren't ready. They worry they can't become what you actually need. They worry that you see them more clearly and honestly than they see themselves. Standing in plain truth is hard for someone who spent years sheltered behind explanations. They want you to know their feelings were always genuine. They want to explain why they went quiet. They want you to understand how overwhelmed they often felt beneath the surface. They want to tell you why they kept pulling back. But they're learning something important and uncomfortable. Arriving late doesn't erase the distance that was created. Good intentions don't undo what was felt in their absence. And understanding why someone did what they did doesn't automatically repair what their choices left behind.